tranquil energy and peaceful thoughts.
So what you're gonna have to do
I
is when you
welcome
fade it out,
you
you're gonna have to turn it off.
extremely
Hit it, turn it off.
Where are the sound effects?
This one.
meticulously
Three pages
edited,
over.
easygoing, and tame podcast. This is Domesticated House Cat, the interview show.
How many is it to the left?
It's to the right. So it's-
Wrong. Get ready for a wild fucking ride. The FCC and cowards aren't welcome here. This is Without Censor, the GRM interview podcast. All right. We are here back again with the wonderful episode we have for you here for the Without Censor podcast. My name's Josh, here today as usual with good buddy Adam.
Howdy.
And we have a very special guest today. We're very excited to have him on. But before we get to that, if you like listening to all our podcasts and want to hear more, you can go to GameRageMagazine.com where you can hear our full menu of podcasts about a multitude of different subjects. Also, if you want to follow us on social media, follow us at Game Rage Magazine on Instagram Instagram and TikTok, at Game Rage Mag on Twitter /X. And all right, cool. Cheap plugs out of the way. Let's get into real quick. The guest we have today, he is a... Well, hold on, not yet. No, yeah, just hold on out there, good buddy. All right, he's a Temple University graduate. He's been featured on the BBC for the World Baseball Classic. He's been credited on Dodgers Nation by Doug McCain. He's been on Japan Ball, Sports Look, Japan, and the World Baseball Network. We're very excited to have him on. So let's get to it. This interview, sanctioned by World Championship Podcast Federation, sponsored by Game Rage Magazine, presented by Without Censor, is scheduled for one fall. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, people around the world, at long last, we bring you the interview of a lifetime. Today's guest is known by many names. He has been called the Legend of Legends, the King of Kakwe, the Prophet of Prospects. He has been called the Sensei of Statistics and is a verifiable daimyo of data. He is Yuri, the Kingmaker Karasawa.
Oh, I love it. I love the intro.
well, thank you
guys. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, man. We heavily, greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you guys reached out to me, and I'm excited to talk about Japanese baseball.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is... I've been following you for a hot minute, and I've been following your YouTube channel, Yaku Cosmopolitan, and reading up on all your articles on Japan Ball. And you are certainly a connoisseur of Nippon professional baseball. And we thank you so much for coming on, and we are truly humbled to have somebody of your caliber to spread the good word of baseball. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, I appreciate all the kind words. I got to give props to everyone who came before me in the industry of covering Japanese baseball in English. There's great people who do it a lot better than I do, but I have found my niche doing this on social media and garnering a bit of a younger audience. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. And real quick, before we get down to the business at hand, why don't you go ahead and plug any social medias, websites, YouTube channels, if you will, while we have everybody's attention and they're, just drooling at the mouth for this interview.
Yeah, of course. So I go by the name Yaku Cosmopolitan on pretty much all platforms. I'm on YouTube. I'm on X/Twitter. I do have an Instagram as well, but I'm not on it too often. So you're going to find most of my work on YouTube, Yaku Cosmopolitan, on Twitter, Yaku Cosmo, and then you can find a lot of my written work on japanball.com, and you'll be seeing some more things for World Baseball Network and Sports Look in these coming months as well.
Great. We'll be looking forward to that. So the first question that we wanted to start off with, when and where did your love for baseball start?
Yeah, so my father's side of the family, I'm half Japanese. I grew up in the US, but my father's side of the family, so that's my American side, they are diehard San Francisco Giants fans, which makes us rivals in a way, but it's okay because we're all united in the love of baseball. And so I grew up like really just enjoying baseball. I played baseball, but eventually I realized like, fuck, I'm a lot better at watching this than playing it. And it really helped that the Giants were so good when I was young. The 2010 World Series, when they won that, it really got me invested as a kid because that team was just so fun to watch. And then they obviously went on to win 2 more World Series. Haven't had as much luck since then, but yeah, so I was really into baseball from a young age. But then the Japanese baseball part, that's where the other side of my family comes in. So I'm kind of like combining, my father's side of the family loving baseball, and then my Japanese side of the family. You add those together, you get Japanese baseball. And right around when I was like 15 or so, that's when I really started to get invested into Nippon Professional Baseball, NPB. So yeah, that's my origin story when it comes to baseball.
Who was your favorite player during those championship years, and who's your favorite player currently on the Giants roster?
Yeah, so growing up, it was definitely Tim Lincecum, the freak, the long hair, the Cy Youngs. He was just such an exciting and fun player to watch. And just, it's rare to have a personality like him in any sport, really. So he's a legend. And my current favorite player, it's kind of hard to say because the way the Giants are run now, they don't really have that face of the franchise. And that's why it hurts so much as a Giants fan to not be able to secure either a Shohei Ohtani or a Yoshinobu Yamamoto. But I would say my favorite player on the Giants now is probably Lamont Wade Jr., first baseman. But I'm still waiting for like a superstar to come in and be the savior of this franchise that we need.
Right. I mean, man, I remember those years with Tim Lincecum. I mean, for somebody like myself who was a Dodgers fan, man, it was must-see TV whenever those games were nationally broadcasted between the Dodgers and the Giants, and Tim Lincecum was on the mound. I mean, he had absolutely like phenomenal years to win as many World Series. I believe it was 3 World Series, right?
Yeah. 3. Yeah. And even though his prime years were behind him towards the end of those Giants championship years, he threw 2 no-hitters in 2013, 2014 as well. So yeah, like he had a great career, a short career, but it was a great one.
Awesome. And as far as NPB, are you allowed to disclose who your favorite team is as far as Nippon Professional Baseball goes, or are you keeping that close to the vest?
So I really don't have a favorite NPB team. Like a lot of people don't believe me when I say that. Obviously, I do have my biases. I do live in the greater Tokyo area, so I prefer if a team from Tokyo does well, just because it's more local to me. Maybe I can like go to a playoff game. It's more accessible. But I typically these days I choose like who I support based on players that I like. So it really depends on from a year-to-year basis. Like maybe this year there's a breakout player on the Fighters who I really enjoy watching. So maybe I give the Fighters a little more support than usual. I do really love Munetaka Murakami, who I'm sure we'll get into. So I end up watching a lot of Yakult Swallows games. But yeah, I don't really claim any affiliations when it comes to MPB. I'm just a San Francisco Giants fan.
Fair enough. I've actually, if you did have a team that you ended up picking, I was going to ask you like how you came to that conclusion, because now that I've become invested in MPB, I've been looking to possibly have like my own favorite team, but I kind of like your approach of just taking it all in and just finding players that you really enjoy, because then you're just invested in everybody. So I'm very much in line with that. And I did want to ask, as far as like your family goes, are you how do I word this? When it comes to family, you're in touch with both sides of your family, correct? You have family in Japan that you visit, or your Japanese heritage that has been very much been a part of you since a young age, or is that something that you just recently got tapped into?
Yeah, I would say that I've always been a little bit closer to my Japanese side, just in terms of things like culture, food. I like Japan a little bit better. And so now living in Japan, I have family here with me. I have friends here with me, and I enjoy living in Japan more than I ever enjoyed living in the US. That's not to say there aren't pros and cons to both, but for me, the pros in Japan outweigh the pros in America. So I am in touch with like both sides of my family, both sides of my heritage, but I'm certainly a little bit more in tune with the Japanese side.
That's really interesting to hear, actually. And so talking about moving abroad, is this something that was planned from your youngest years, that you were going to be, moving to Japan and talking about and writing about Nippon professional baseball? Is that something that you had ingrained in you from a very young age, or is that something that happened in college?
So I thought about going to school somewhere local to me. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, by the way, but I thought about going to school somewhere on the West Coast. But so Temple University actually has campuses all around the world. They have 2 in Japan now. They have 1 in Rome. And so I thought this was a perfect opportunity for me to really kind of get a fresh start. Not that there was anything wrong with my life in the US, but I thought, I get to go to an American school in Japan, and I just get to be closer to baseball, because living in Las Vegas, we do have the AAA team for the Oakland A's. And, they're going to end up getting the A's themselves, the MLB team. But when I was there, it's just like, for somebody who wants to get into covering baseball, I want to be up close, and I want to actually have all these teams around me. And so coming to Japan made sense in that regard. But it wasn't really like I was trying to pursue covering Japanese baseball as a career. It was just kind of a hobby, a pipe dream, something I wanted to do if everything went well. And so while I was in college, I started the Yaku Cosmopolitan Project, and now I've finished college, and I'm hoping to pursue this full-time, covering Japanese baseball in English as a career. So we'll see how it goes.
Great. So I wanted to follow up and ask about, since you've been overseas, how has your perspective about life and perhaps your own identity changed living in Japan?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Someone like me, I studied sociology and politics and culture, so I might have a bit more like self-awareness than I should about certain things. But as somebody who's half Japanese, but I don't really look very Japanese, very few people ever realize that I have any Japanese heritage. It's definitely, it gives you weird looks. In Japan, even if you're Japanese, if you don't look Japanese, it is hard to blend in from a social standpoint. However, I would say it's easier to keep to yourself in Japan, even though Japan, compared to the US, Japan's a collectivist society. Japan has a lot more, I think, like social norms and traditions going back in time that make it a bit more of a, not as much of a melting pot as, say, the US, but it's like in Japan, it's easier to keep to yourself, just keep your head down and do your thing without being bothered. It's easier to blend in outwardly in the US, meaning like you can look different, but no one's gonna bat an eye because everyone looks different in the US. Whereas in Japan, it's not as much of a homogenous society as people might stereotype it as. There are people from different countries here, but I would say it's definitely made me more aware. Like, I don't feel always welcome everywhere in Japan, but that's not to say it's not from like a negative standpoint. Like, oh, I'm being discriminated against. It's not really that. It's just like you feel a little kind of shadow looming over you just because you don't look Japanese. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I find that very interesting. Just like, I don't really think about like my own identity or the way I look. I never thought about that so often until I started living in Japan full time.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the cultural differences between Japan and America. Is it for you, in your experience, is it one of those things where, if you're walking late at night on a street and someone crosses the street to get to the other side, is it like that? Kind of like, that's kind of how it is here with, people that, when they do treat people differently, it's like, oh, it's maybe out of fear. Do you feel it's like that, or is it just kind of, well, you're not really the same, so we're just gonna keep an extra eye on you a little bit? Maybe is it something like that it kind of feels like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very subtle. And I will say, I'm half white, obviously, and there is the perception in Japan that if you are, say, half Japanese, but your other side is a different kind of Asian, or maybe you're darker skinned, that's going to get you way more looks than if you're white. So I don't have it bad in any ways, but still, like, there is a little bit of like, getting a side eye. Or the funniest thing for me still is like when I came into Japan most recently, so I was visiting home in the US, I came back to Japan. I have a Japanese passport, and the security guard in Tokyo is talking to me only in English, even though I have a Japanese passport. I'm speaking to him in Japanese, but he would only ever speak to me in English. And I think that's something that maybe he didn't think about. Like, he doesn't think that would come across as a little bit unwelcoming. I think he thinks that it's like, oh, I'm being nice to him to speak to him in English because he doesn't look Japanese. He must not speak Japanese. But it's just like, it's little things like that where it's like, okay, I see that I don't get treated. I can never be treated, in fact, as a full Japanese person, no matter how hard I try.
And as far as food goes, I've heard that there's local restaurants, I guess you could say, that are kind of exclusively for Japanese, or that Japanese tried to protect from, I guess, like people that are visiting to Japan. Are you able to go to those restaurants, or are you still kind of maybe discriminated against just based on your appearance as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, you might see that in like an izakaya, like a bar in certain areas where there's a lot of, say, U.S. military, where they say that, these people never follow the rules. They're obnoxious. So we're just going to make a blanket rule to not allow foreigners. I don't really ever visit places like that, so I can't really say from a firsthand perspective. But I would say for me, I would be allowed in. Like, they're not going to be so strict about that, in the sense that, like, oh, you don't look Japanese, so you're not allowed in. Like, I think it's more about, even if you're a foreigner, if you act Japanese, and if you speak Japanese, and if you adopt very Japanese customs, you do get very much close to being a Japanese person. It's just that for me, I don't look Japanese. I speak Japanese, but I, grew up in the US. So culturally, I'm a little less Japanese. And so that's probably like where I can sense a little bit of getting weird looks. But again, I don't want to make it seem like it's discriminatory completely towards people who don't look Japanese. That's not always the case. It is for some people. And as I said, for people from maybe other parts of Asia, they're going to get it a lot worse than someone like me who is American.
Right. And I wanted to follow up and ask, in what ways has your background and your identity inspired your work as a journalist at Japan Ball and your YouTube channel, Yakyu Cosmopolitan? What ways has your background and your identity affected your platforms? Yeah.
So, like I said a little earlier, I do think that with covering Japanese baseball, I feel as though I'm combining my love for baseball, which I got from my father's side, and then my Japanese heritage, which I get from my mother's side. And we'll get more into this later, but there are very key differences between the way baseball is played and consumed in Japan versus the US. And there are merits to both. But it's very interesting for me to be able to have both perspectives. Sometimes if I criticize one aspect of, Japanese baseball, people will say like, oh, you're just hating on Japanese baseball. You don't understand. This is the Japanese way. And I understand that perspective. But I also feel like for me, as somebody who has seen and can perceive the differences in both the cultural and sport side of things, I really enjoy being able to pick out like the differences and the similarities. And I don't think one is inherently better than the other. You can learn from each other. And so that's where I try to have my own background come into the picture, is I try to be that kind of bridge for at least opening discourse between Japanese and American baseball.
Yeah, man, I think what you do is, excellent work. You provide towards the vitality of baseball, which is always a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Because, just with the last World Baseball Classic, I feel like the sport has been elevated, maybe not to the degree of the NFL, but now we're getting in the conversations with the NFL because of the cross-pollination of players, to have Shohei Ohtani to come to the Dodgers and Yamamoto and Shota Imanaga. I mean, I feel like baseball is now getting towards the level of an NFL, I suppose. My next question to you is, as far as Japanese sports, or rather Nippon professional baseball goes, you have written an article that I highly recommend everybody look into, that is about the number 18 and what it means to Japanese culture and baseball culture in Japan. But I was curious to ask about if there's any other traditions that exist within Japanese baseball that you could enlighten us about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main one, the one that if you watch so much Japanese baseball, you almost forget about because it is just so deeply ingrained into the viewing experience, is the Oendan, which is the cheering sections in the outfield for each team. That is the main difference anyone will immediately notice when attending an MLB game, or really any game outside of, I guess, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the US, because the cheering sections are dedicated fans. They're basically fan clubs for the teams, and they are playing music. They are singing songs for each player individually all throughout the game. And that makes it really a lively atmosphere the whole time. The only comparison from, a US standpoint, I suppose the MLS has a bit more of a lively atmosphere like that. So soccer, European soccer in general definitely has an atmosphere that more closely reflects MPB. And it's not just MPB, obviously. You have it at the high school level, the college level as well. But yeah, like the cheering sections, I think it makes Japanese baseball seem more welcoming. Like if you are an outsider who's never seen the sport and you come in, it's like, oh, this is really fun. There's no hostilities here. Everyone shuts up when the other team's up to bat, and they let the other team's cheering section go to work. Whereas in the U.S., if you go to a game, you might see opposing fans just holler, insults about the other player's mother, like the entire game. And you do have people like that in Japan as well. But in terms of like a fan experience, definitely, I think Japan is more enjoyable. Another maybe tradition that comes to mind, I'm not sure if it's a tradition really, but it's kind of just like a thing that people do. If a pitcher drills a batter, so a hit by pitch, they will take off their cap and kind of bow towards the batter to apologize to them. And you don't see that very often in MLB, where it's just like, it's a contest of who's being a bigger tough guy, right? If you hit the guy, you're not going to really say sorry to him. Whereas in Japan, it's like, okay, I hit you. I'm very sorry. I apologize for hurting you. So those are two areas, one within the game, one outside of the game, that I think makes Japanese baseball stand out.
That's pretty awesome. I just wanted to ask one quick question before I have Josh dial in here. So Shota Imanaga has been doing something where he tips his hat to the umpire as he gets a new ball back. Is that exclusive to him, or is that something that is done in Japan as well?
Oh, that is, I would say, something that a lot of pitchers do. He is very animated, Imanaga. Imanaga is a very quirky guy, so he definitely stands out more when he does it. He's just really funny in general. But yeah, like paying your respect to the opposing team and the umpiring crew, that's definitely big in MPB as well. You very rarely have ejections in MPB in terms of, a player getting really mad at a strike call and yelling at the umpire and getting ejected. That's pretty rare. You do see it with managers every now and then. But again, compared to MLB, where you're going to see ejections, every other night, definitely less common. And it's because, it's not because the umpiring is better in Japan. In fact, I would say it's probably a little bit worse because, like the umpires union doesn't want the strike zone to even be shown on the broadcast. So if you're watching an MPB broadcast, you'll immediately notice, like MLB's had the strike zone on their broadcast for like 10 years. But so everyone knows, oh, the umpire missed that call. That was definitely out of the strike zone. In MPB, the funny part is like all the pitch tracking apps. It's like, even if the pitch was definitely 5 feet off the plate, the pitch tracking app will like put it on the corner of the strike zone just to be like, no, the umpire didn't miss that one. So there's definitely much more of a respect level, like a hierarchy in place. Like, okay, the umpire is the boss here. Doesn't apply to everyone. There's definitely players who are a little more outspoken, but I think in general, yeah, like things that Imanaga do kind of do reflect a lot of Japanese players in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. And just to circle back a little bit on the beaning of batters, if you will, it's funny you talk about how, they will bow, tip their hat, bow, say, hey man, my bad, I'm sorry. That's basically not existent in MLB. And as a matter of fact, to take it even further, it's like showing that in the Nippon baseball, league, it's essentially, if you get hit, it's an accident, right? This was completely unintentional. But here in MLB, there's plenty of times when it's fully intentional that I'm going to hit this batter to send a message. And hey, we might almost fight after this. We might exchange blows and clear dugouts. Is there anything that ever happens like that in the Nippon baseball?
You do have bench clearings, and I would say like in the 80s and 90s, there was actually an era in MPB where fights were more common. A lot of that was initiated by the foreign players. Like there's a famous clip of Rod Allen, like a pitch comes near his dome and he just literally chases the pitcher into the outfield, but the Japanese pitcher is like running away from him because he doesn't want to throw fists. More recently, Shintaro Fujinami, who is now in the minor leagues for the New York Mets. Last year, he was on the A's and the Orioles. He was always known to be a very wild pitcher. And there were many instances where this is completely unintentional. He just doesn't have the best command, but he would, run it close to a batter's head. Famously, there was an incident between him and Vladimir Ballantyne of the Swallows where the benches do end up clearing. But in terms of like fights, like, brawls between a pitcher and a batter, you definitely don't see that anymore in MPB. Like if that happened in MPB today, it would be like the viral news story for probably the next month, because you just don't see it. You see little, chirping here and there. You see, players maybe exchange words, but like a fist fight in MPB in the year 2024, not going to happen.
Yeah, it's basically next to impossible, right, at this point. So, but when you look at, I guess, the level of respect, because it does seem, because I'm not as well versed in the Nippon baseball as Adam is, but from a lot of the stuff, because I've been getting into it more lately as we've been doing our sports, talks and stuff like that. Yes. But it seems like the game is just more respectful, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's played on a more proper or honorable level, I guess, is maybe the right way to put it. Because, an example of that would be, I guess, over here, we have, guys like, a guy I played baseball with, Joe Kelly, right? He was famous for that whole thing where he would stand outside the dugout and wouldn't leave until the other guys would leave, right? That's like probably would be seen, I would imagine, if that happened in Nippon baseball, that would be an extremely disrespectful act, and you'd probably get, suspended for like half the season or something, right?
So Robert Whiting, in the book You Gotta Have Wa, talks about like the huge differences philosophically between Japanese and American baseball. And some people have criticized his work as being like overly Orientalist, but I do think there definitely is like that, Bushido tradition from Japan of like, okay, this is an art. We look at baseball as an art. It's almost like a martial art. And so it has to be treated with a lot of respect and honor in terms of the way you conduct yourself. Even little things that, American players, Latin players would never think about, like spitting on the field. Japanese players don't spit on the field, even if you're like chewing gum or you got sunflower seeds. You don't spit on the field. That's disrespectful to the field. Again, I don't think that's inherently like, oh, is this a good thing? This is a bad thing. I do think a lot of people get into the territory of like putting Japan on a pedestal when they look at things like this. I just think it's like, these are just small cultural differences that when you put a microscope on it within the game of baseball, it looks like a huge difference. But I definitely do agree that, yeah, like the way a player like maybe like Joe Kelly conducts himself, that would be viewed as very unusual and probably disrespectful in MPB. But you do have certain, foreign players who have come over who, they kind of tone down their personality to fit within Japan, and they do just fine. This isn't for MPB, but for the KBO, Yasiel Puig went to Korea. And so that was always very interesting. Like a lot of Japanese pundits were asking like, oh, is Yasiel Puig somebody who could make it in Japan? Is he too, out there? I do think Korea is probably a little more open to having guys like that than Japan. I don't know enough about Korean baseball to say, but that's just like the perception I get. Mm-hmm. But then again, like Japan last year took in Trevor Bauer. So, and they really seem to enjoy Trevor Bauer's presence. So it's not like a 100% thing, like, oh, these players who are really outspoken and really out there, put their heart on their sleeve. Like those types of players aren't necessarily looked down upon, but you're definitely unorthodox if you do that.
Yeah, I get you. And this is probably a redundant question, but I feel like I know the answer, or you can at least infer it from just what you've been explaining. But I just, just to clarify and get it out there. Obviously over here in the MLB, we've had scandals, we've had issues, the Astros with the stealing of the signs, all that sort of stuff. Is there anything like that takes place in Japan or any of the Nippon baseball leagues?
So in terms of like sign stealing, It was funny a couple years ago between the Hanshin Tigers and Yakult Swallows. There was an incident where I think it was the Swallows side was accusing the Tigers of sign stealing, but it was within the game, which in the US, if you are like a base runner and you look at the catcher's signs and, you know, they're really easy to decipher, and then you relay that over to your batter, that's gamesmanship, right? It's like what the Astros and maybe some other teams did with electronic sign stealing, you know, banging of trash cans and whatnot. That's different. But like general sign stealing or like pitch tipping, that's considered gamesmanship. Whereas in Japan, that was kind of a big deal. Like, oh, you're not playing fair. And who knows if they were actually sign stealing or not. But I think if they were, you know, within the game, I think that's totally fine. So it kind of was interesting to me, like, oh, this is a big deal, even though, you know, they weren't using like any external like electronics to do so.
Yeah, and I also just want to quickly cut a quick promo that anybody that hasn't subscribed to Yuri's Yakyu Cosmopolitan, he goes at length talking about Fujinami and also the articles that he has written on Japan ball as far as the minor leagues go in NPB, and the article I was discussing about the tradition of the number 18 as far as pitchers go in NPB as well is also worth checking out. So please check out those things if you are a fan of baseball. And that's all I got to say about that. And on the subject of philosophies as far as baseball goes, where do you believe the differences in philosophies and in practices exist in American versus Japanese baseball?
Yeah, so this is another thing that Robert Whiting talks in length about. I got a chance to meet Robert Whiting last year, which was cool. I mean, he was big in, you know, much like 50 years ago here, but he still has good points to offer. And the big difference, I think, between Japan and the US in terms of practice is just like how much they practice. Because in Japan, from a youth level, it's all about like getting reps in and just like practicing until you can't anymore. It's just like you practice. That's what makes you better. And, you know, practice is like even harder than the game. You practice so hard that the game comes easy to you. And I think a lot of people in the West might look at that and be like, wow, that's really old school. Like now, you know, you might realize like if you tire yourself out in practice, you might not actually be better in the game. And of course, you know, things have evolved a little bit. So it's not as bad as it used to be, but certainly at a youth level still, that's why, you know, at like the Little League World Series, Japan is so strong. Like those kids practice a lot more than a lot of the American teams. Another philosophical, like strategical difference is bunting. That's huge. Like bunting has died in Major League Baseball, unless it's like bunting against the shift for a base hit, right? So bunting for a hit, but sacrifice bunting is basically non-existent in MLB. I think someone on the Diamondbacks did it in the World Series last year, and it was like blowing up on Twitter, like, oh my God, the guy sacrificed bunted. Whereas in Japan, it's just like bunting is still supreme. That is still like small ball is still the way to play. Now, part of that is that right now MPB has dead balls, so it kind of exacerbates that even more because you see less home runs. You're seeing a lot more of the inside game, you know, the ball being put on the infield dirt. But bunting and just kind of like sacrificing yourself for the team is seen as a huge positive. Like guys will reach a milestone. Like he reached 300 career sacrifice bunts. Let's give him flowers for reaching 300 career sacrifice bunts. You're not going to see that in MLB, certainly not in the modern day. And really, it's like even the best players in Japan sometimes will bunt. Even if the situation, like from a data perspective, if you do all like the scoring matrices, it makes no sense for the guy to bunt, but it's just seen as like, this is the textbook thing to do. This is what we've done for generations. You are sacrificing yourself for the team to move the runners along. No matter how good you are not above the team. So I think that's a key philosophical difference. I think that is something that will go away over time because I just think that's how the sport evolves. Like some people would say like, oh, bunting that is so ingrained within Japanese baseball that it can never change, and you shouldn't try to change it. I don't think that's necessarily the case. You have a lot of younger people in Japan who are opposed to bunting. And then that actually carries over to like pitching as well, with the old school outlook on starting pitchers working deep into games. Wins are still like the king stat. People care like how many wins did you get. So I just think Japan is a lot more like you're watching 1970s style Major League Baseball. And maybe at a youth level, it's a bit more of a cookie cutter approach, and that works for certain players. It definitely makes them a very well-rounded player. Their fundamentals are going to be spotless, but it also means that they might not be able to branch out individually as much as a younger like MLB prospect would.
Right. Yeah. It's very interesting because that's such an astute observation that I was going to bring up about the comparison between, how it is now in the Nippon baseball. It's more of like the 70s, 80s style of MLB where it wasn't so much focused necessarily on the individual. It was more of you had the team effort, right? It was about, hey, man, we got to do what's best for the team. Whereas now MLB has sort of shifted because I think it's because of the massive salaries that guys are getting. Yeah, with that comes the ego and well, I'm not really doing this for the team. I'm trying to do what's best for me here. What's best for me, the guy who's making all the money, right? That's kind of where I think we've shifted. Do you think that money is the thing that's going to be what shifts it over there in Nippon, kind of like it did here?
I do think there is something to say about, like in MLB, you have these larger than life, superstar personalities. And maybe they, develop an ego to where they're not playing team baseball like they used to when they were in high school, for instance. However, I do think like Shohei Ohtani is the perfect example of the fact that you can be the best of both worlds. Ohtani has that, Japanese-ness to him. He has the dedication to the craft, like working tirelessly to reach your goals. But he also has the kind of creativity and individualism that comes with being in the U.S. because Ohtani, when he went to MLB in 2018, he was already a great player, but he has elevated himself to the best player in the world, if not the best player of all time, while playing with the Angels and now the Dodgers. He really bulked up. He became, stronger than he ever was before. He dedicated himself to perfecting his craft. And I'm not sure if that would have been possible if he was just in MPB for his entire career. But that's a double-edged sword because I don't think Shohei Ohtani would even exist if he was, an American, as in, they would have said, oh, the two-way thing, that's impossible. Just pick one. So it took, a perfect storm of, okay, we have this very special prospect who's 18. He was thinking of going to MLB right out the gates, but Hideki Kuriyama and the Nippon Ham Fighters were able to convince him, start your career in Japan. We will show the world that being a two-way player at the professional level is possible. And then he goes to MLB 5 years later, and now he's elevated his game to a whole different level. I do think Ohtani combines like the Japanese-ness and the American-ness, like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. And I'm not a Dodgers fan like Adam. I'm an Angels fan. So I have a little hate in my heart at this point for Shohei because I do refer to him as a traitor. All right. Now listen, some of that's conjecture, but it's funny to see the difference between generations. Like with me, I mean, yeah, listen, I'm not like a boomer or anything, but I mean, I'm like a millennial and I have a loyalty to the team, right? Whereas now a lot of these Gen Z, Gen Alpha type people, they have loyalty to players more so than a team. So I think Shohei is the perfect example, like you said, of a guy who can be the best of both worlds. He can be the team player and he can also be that superstar at the same time. But I do think it's funny. And he's also a good example of like what I'm saying, where a lot of people who were Angels fans bailed and went to become Dodger fans because they're not about the team. They're about following Shohei, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. But it's just funny to see the difference between generations and how fandom of baseball has evolved and changed in a certain way,
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say like people in Japan, because Ohtani is like, if in America, the only people who know and like Ohtani are sports fans, like in Japan, it's like, obviously Ohtani is one of the biggest celebrities, if not the biggest celebrity in the country. So even people who don't follow baseball know of him. And by default, you're probably, if you liked the Angels before, you probably like the Dodgers now. But that's not really like, I like the team. It's literally, I like Ohtani, therefore I like the team he plays for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that but it's just funny to note that that's kind of almost the norm, at least with here. I've met a lot of younger baseball fans that kind of don't. Hey, what's your favorite team? I don't really have one. I just kind of follow players around. I like, this guy, he moved over here. This so-and-so went to the Yankees. So now I follow him and I rep Yankees gear, or he gets traded to the Cardinals. Oh, well, now I rep Cardinals gear because I like this guy. It's just interesting to see that kind of shift, I guess, in the generational mentality between us all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's basically how I consume MPB. So I can definitely relate to people who consume MLB that way. But yeah, it probably depends a lot on your childhood, right? Like if you grow up watching a team, very hard to abandon them unless they abandon you. Like for a lot of Oakland A's fans, unfortunately, that's how it's been.
Yeah, true. Just like the Dodgers did that to me, and that's why I hate the Dodgers now.
I did want to ask 2 follow-up questions relevant to the philosophies between American and Japanese baseball. So we have the book that is more or less the gospel on hitting with Ted Williams. Is there something equivalent to that in Japan with like, I don't know which order his name goes, but Sadaharu O Sadahara, he's the world record holder for most home runs. Does he have a book or anything like that that is, I guess, an equivalent to Ted Williams' book on hitting?
So with Sadaharu O, and also his teammate on the Giants during those dynasty years that they had in the 60s, Shigeo Nagashima, those two are definitely revered. Like, they are so ingrained in Japanese history. They are basically like the Babe Ruth and the Ted Williams of Japan. And so they're both quite old now. O is actually, a front office person for the SoftBank Hawks. So he doesn't really dabble too much on the player side of things anymore, but he was, manager for a long time as well. He was even a manager of Samurai Japan in the WBC. So a lot of his philosophies are definitely ingrained in many players. Hiromitsu Ochiai, who played for various teams, most notably like the Chunichi Dragons, like he's another one who is very famous for his hitting tendencies, like getting passed down through generations. I would say in general, like I can't really speak. I would have to read a lot more about like what certain players get their influences from to be able to answer exactly like who's like the most influential hitter in MPB history. But a lot of the word that's always used in Japanese hitting is compact hitting. So it's the complete opposite of MLB right now with the launch angle revolution of that, kind of uppercut swinging for the fences. This is not just a conversation about Japanese baseball. This is like a philosophical kind of sport, topic. But like obviously in basketball, you have this same issue where when the 3-point revolution started, it's like the game isn't as aesthetically pleasing anymore, but it's being played at the most efficient way possible, right? And so the home run revolution, the launch angle revolution in MLB, that hasn't made its way over to MPB yet, but you do have certain hitters who profile a lot more like that. So there's more swing and miss in their game, and those guys are very heavily criticized by the media. So it's very interesting.
Right. And while we're on the subject of Shohei Ohtani, I wanted to ask, as far as the acquisition of Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto for the Dodgers, how has that impacted Japan itself? Is Japan universally a Dodgers fan, or has Shota Imanaga and maybe even Yu Darvish maybe have people go to those teams as opposed to having Japan universally as Dodgers fans?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It's really tough to say because I would say dedicated baseball fans are are split. Like they're not all going to become Dodger fans just for Ohtani and Yamamoto, like many other Japanese people who have watched MLB for years. They probably had already selected their team and they're going to stick with it. I know some Japanese people who, became Angels fans for Ohtani and they're sticking with the Angels even when he's gone. There's also the fact that Ichiro popularized the Mariners in the 2000s. The same goes for Hideki Matsui and to a lesser extent Masahiro Tanaka for the Yankees. So like for many years there, like the Dodgers and the Yankees were like the default teams that Japanese people like, mostly because they've heard of them. They're just the biggest teams. So in terms of dedicated baseball fans, some of them probably went over. A lot of them actually probably went over to the Dodgers because of, Ohtani and Yamamoto. But a lot of other people aren't going to select a team just based on the players. They're going to actually, say, oh, maybe this team, I like them for a certain sentimental reason. And you'll see that with like DNA Baystars fans are probably going to be a lot more inclined towards the Cubs because Shota Imanaga is there. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I would say baseball fans in Japan decide their favorite MLB team. It's going to be, oh, this guy used to play for my favorite MPB team. Now he's in MLB, whether that be a Japanese player or a foreign player who played briefly in Japan and went back. So that might be how those guys select their favorite MLB team. In terms of casuals, people who only, watch highlights and just pay attention to what Ohtani did on the news, those guys are almost exclusively going to go over to the Dodgers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to circle back real quick to the fundamentals portion that we were discussing before this question. For people that don't know, it's called The Science of Hitting, the Ted Williams book, which is a excellent book. I mean, it's so good on the basic mechanics of hitting a baseball. And I mean, it's a book that I have, and my dad gave it to me when I was playing baseball, obviously. But one of the things you had mentioned was the hitting dingers or the going yard, mentality that's kind of come into Major League Baseball now, where you got these guys with these huge golf swings or these uppercut swings. And I cannot just, I hate that. I hate that so much. I am a small ball guy, a contact guy. Like, hey, you got to get on base because getting on base scores runs. And if you, in baseball, I mean, listen, one of the greatest hitters of all time, batting average was around 300, right? That's like one of the best all-time batting averages is 300, which for people that don't know, that's every 3 out of 10 times you're successful at actually getting on base. So that's a very low percentage, right? So it's funny to see how, now everybody wants to do the big bang of hitting, let's hit this home run and get out of here. But then if you look at their stats, it's like, the other 3 times you made appearances that game, you struck out or you hit a weak fly ball or you basically went 1 for 4 and yeah, sure, you hit a home run, but it's just, I know it's more flashy and that's what people like to see, but God, I hate it so much. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm much more in the group that says, hey, this is the most efficient way to play the game. So it's like, what can you do, right? Like, I think the evolution of any sport, and that's why I brought up the basketball example with 3-pointers. You have guys who try to imitate Steph Curry, but they're not Steph Curry. So you have people just chucking threes from the logo and missing, and that's just a really aesthetically bad product. And I agree, like players like, say Max Muncy, even for the Dodgers, not really aesthetically pleasing to watch. Why? Because he strikes out 3 times a game, and then the other time maybe he hits a home run, maybe he walks. A lot of these players who play the game at the most efficient way by trying to swing for the fences and then take your walks. We'll get into Munetaka Murakami later. That's a little more of his approach. I'm okay with it, but I do think there needs to be a balance. And maybe in MLB, they've gone too far in that direction where most hitters are doing that. Whereas in Japan, only a very small handful of hitters are doing that. I think both leagues could benefit from having a blend of both. But from your perspective, a lot of people share that perspective, especially older baseball fans. And that's why I say, if you want to watch that style, that old school style of contact, bat to ball, you can still get that by watching MPB. And that's what's great. Like, you can still enjoy the same game of baseball, but it's a different brand. And if you watch MPB versus MLB, it's really night and day.
Yeah, and I've been talking shit about, betraying the Angels and jumping to another team. I'm not gonna do that, obviously, because like I stick with the team, right? But now that you're saying this about NPB, it's got me very on board to just go full into NPB to get to see what I want to see, right? Get to see the ball played how I want to see it played, and go from there.
Yeah, and with the dead ball crisis right now, and the dead balls, I'll just briefly explain. The MPB balls right now, they are not flying at all. So even when the batter, squares it up, it's dying on the warning track 9 times out of 10. You have to perfectly square it up to hit a home run. We are on pace to have the fewest home runs hit ever in MPB history this year, and it's one of the lowest scoring seasons ever. It's really comparable to like 1968 in MLB with the year of the pitcher, Bob Gibson. Like league ERA is below 3, league OPS is in the low 600s, and I think that has hurt the product in more ways than it's helped. But it's going to be interesting to see if this continues for multiple years. How are teams going to adapt? How are hitters going to have success without hitting the ball over the fence, or without the ability to hit the ball over the fence as easily? So I think it's definitely like shown the bad side of like what happens when there are no home runs at all. Like it's dull. Like there's no climax. It's like you're watching the entire game waiting for like that big hit, and it never comes. But at the same time, you're forcing these teams to get very creative about the way they score, and all the games are tight because obviously when not many players can slug, it forces everyone to just kind of hit singles the other way and steal bases. So it's definitely making the games very low scoring and very tight.
Yeah, I get. Do you think this is happening because did they change the construction of the baseball itself? Did they change the way the bats work? Like, what's actually causing the dead ball issue?
Yeah, so the dead balls actually started around 2022, which makes Munetaka Murakami's home run record even more impressive. But 2024 is the new low. And Mizuno, the company that manufactures these balls, they keep claiming that, no, we haven't changed anything. But all the research suggests, and this gets into specifics that even I can't speak to with like air resistance or drag and the coefficient of the ball and whatnot. But there's something wrong with the ball, like that's for sure. You can even just see it, like when if you hold both of the balls in your hand, an MLB ball and an MPB ball, the MLB ball is like significantly harder. The MPB ball has a little more give to it, and it's pre-tacked, meaning it's kind of sticky. So it's easier for pitchers to manipulate. So it's a combination of those things. It's like easier for the pitcher to manipulate and spot his pitches, on top of the fact that it's not flying as much. And I just think like that's really bad for like the hitters. They are getting like part of their careers taken away from them, like part of their career where they could be, hitting a lot of home runs and adding to their resume. It's becoming incredibly difficult for them, and you're not rewarding them for doing the right things. So I think the dead ball crisis in MPB right now definitely needs to be talked about, even within the context of like, hey, this guy's going over to MLB. Let's look at his stats. People should know that MPB right now is heavily inflated in favor of pitchers. But we had this 10 years ago, 2011, 2012, there was the same exact thing happening. And then in 2013, they juiced the balls. And that's when Vladimir Valentin hit 60 home runs, set the MPB home run record. So, we might see something like that happen again. But right now, yeah, MPB is an all-time low in terms of offense.
That's very interesting. I'm a huge Mizuno shill because like when I played, that's all I used. I used Mizuno catcher gear, Mizuno gloves, Mizuno cleats, and I always loved all their products. Everything that they made was top tier. It was way better than the American stuff. Not to talk shit about the American stuff necessarily, but the Rawlings stuff, All-Star, that stuff was just it just felt cheap and just didn't feel like it was good quality. But the Mizuno stuff was like A level, man. It was top tier.
Yeah, that's what makes it so odd. Like there has to be something, because I don't think they would have done this on purpose. So something in the manufacturing, I think, has gone wrong to where the balls just are not flying at all. And so I think, MPB needs to step in and regulate that to some extent.
All right, so I guess I'm going to tag in, and I want to transition over to, I guess, free agency. So as far as the recent acquisitions of, I guess, Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, in what ways has, I guess, the Dodgers, or even, I guess I could throw in the Cubs as well with Shota Imanaga, but in what ways have both these teams impacted the free agency of Japanese players, if at all?
So I would say the Dodgers, they kind of proved that they own the Japanese market by going out and spending $1 billion on Ohtani and Yamamoto. The Dodgers have always been, big on the Japanese market, but this kind of definitively stamped down, like, no, the Dodgers own Japan. That's not to say other franchises like the Yankees, the Padres, the Giants, the Red Sox, the Mariners. There's a lot of them that still are players for Japanese talent down the line. But the Dodgers will always be viewed as the top dog now for many, many years to come. Because they secured both of them. And I think they did come as a package. I think if Ohtani had gone elsewhere, I think Yamamoto would have gone with him too. But it would have been different if they only got one. It would have been like, okay, well, that could be just a one-off. Ohtani, he was an angel. He just wanted to go cross town to a better team. That makes sense. But the fact that they secured both Yamamoto and Ohtani in the same offseason, that makes the Dodgers like the heavy front runner for all Japanese talent for the next decade at the very least, especially because it just seems like they have unlimited money. And I do want to bring the geographical factor into account too. Like the West Coast is always going to have an advantage over the East Coast for Japanese talent, just because it's closer to Japan. It's closer to home for a lot of guys. They want to play in California a lot of the time. That's not to say, that's for everyone. Like Shota Imanaga, Seiya Suzuki, Kodai Senga, those guys didn't care. They went to the Midwest. They went to the East Coast. Some players, it's on an individual basis, right? They care more about what team they're going to be a part of. Maybe they like a specific city, but in general, California is the place to be for Japanese players. And who's the best team? Who's the biggest team in California? That would be the Dodgers.
I guess that's true. It is a little bit worrisome, and it's going to lead into my next question. Because as much as I personally love this as a Dodger to have even the prospect of potentially getting Roki Sasaki, who we'll talk about a bit later. I would prefer if Japan was just open season for every team, because it'd be just as cool to see Roki Sasaki maybe pitch for Seattle Mariners and, wear the same uniform as Randy Johnson or even Ichiro Suzuki. Like, I think that would be just as cool as if he was in a Dodgers uniform. But I wanted to follow up and ask, so specifically on Yakyu Cosmopolitan, your YouTube channel, you discussed a topic with Sean Spradling that brought attention, which was the end of the international team partnerships for MLB with other international leagues. That's NPB, KBO, most notably. These are partnerships that included data and personal sharing. Some of the teams that had relationships were the Mets and Cebu Lions, D-backs, and the Bay Stars, Rangers, and Ham Fighters. Overall, this was an effort to prevent pre-negotiation tampering before a player is able to get posted. How do you feel about this subject currently after some time away from it?
Yeah, so this was something that came at the beginning of this current season, out of nowhere. Like, people didn't see this coming. I think it was mostly viewed as something negative because a lot of these partnerships that teams had, sharing data, maybe sending over a coach, exchanging coaches and getting like different outlooks on philosophies, that was viewed as a good thing. More cooperation, more globalization of baseball. We still have to wait and see like to what extent a lot of these like restrictions apply. However, What's interesting is that this month it was announced that MPB executives, along with representatives from all 12 MPB teams, are going to be meeting with MLB to discuss things like data exchange and broadcasting rights. So we'll definitely see what comes of it, but it's interesting to see, like, I think MLB was the one that walked back on these kind of partnerships initially, but now MPB is coming back to the table and saying, you know what, maybe we need to open up the cooperations again. In general, I would say the main thing here, like when anyone talks about a relationship between MLB and MPB, the only thing people care about at the end of the day is the posting system. And the posting system does need to be overhauled. I think most people would agree that the posting system as in its current form is not sustainable. And if the posting system is changed as a result of these measures that MLB is taking, then perhaps it ends up being a good thing. But right now, the posting system does not really, it definitely doesn't benefit the MPB teams. It doesn't particularly benefit the MPB players either, because some guys want to come over to MLB at an earlier age. They're not necessarily allowed to do that. But, we will see what comes of this. But for now, that's what I would say. I would say that it probably looks like it's negative. This is not a great thing. But if the posting system is overhauled as a result of this, then it could lead to something better.
Yeah. And I just wanted to quickly mention, because, we're talking about some of the future stars of baseball. And, established stars like Roki Sasaki. Andrew Friedman had, I guess, what I don't know how to word it, but he's had conversations with Roki Sasaki in the offseason, and I'm just like not down for that. As much as I love the Dodgers, I am very much in the camp that everybody should have an equal chance at every player, and I don't think that front running should be allowed in its entirety. So I just had to quickly make that comment, but I think Josh here, or unless you had something to say about that particular statement.
Yeah, well, not just Friedman, like the AJ Preller, the Padres GM, like literally name dropped Roki Sasaki while giving a speech talking about players he wants to add to the Padres family. And it was funny that these restrictions came the week after he said that. So it almost seemed like it was a response from other owners to being like, you know what, AJ, you can't just like name drop one of the best young pitchers in the world and expect us not to do something about it. But yeah, like I agree. Like obviously, teams having the upper hand before negotiations even begin, that's not good for the ecosystem of negotiations by any means.
Yeah, true. Now that we're on this subject of, I guess, kind of the interface between MLB and the NPB or just Japanese baseball in general, I have this theory, and I just want to run it by you just to get your thoughts on it. I have a theory that the MLB obviously sees dollar signs. They're motivated by money in this huge market. The Asian Pacific market for baseball is huge. It's probably obviously behind MLB. It's probably close to being number 2 in the world for the sport of baseball. So this theory I have is that with all these games being played in other countries, they're starting to expand and kind of maybe test the market over the last few years. The NFL's doing it. Other sports are doing it, but I have this theory that the MLB is eventually going to incorporate a third league. You'd have essentially American, the National League, and then you'd have some sort of, Asian Pacific. I don't know what they would call it, but I feel like they're going to eventually have like a Japan, Korea, Taiwan, like an Asian kind of league that gets thrown into the mix here. And yeah, maybe they're not interfacing with like how we have the interleague play, I guess. Here, maybe it's not interfacing to that level, but I do think that that's kind of where it's headed. What are your thoughts on that? And do you have any indications that could be a potential thing that might happen in the future?
I think that concept is very similar to like the Super League concept in European soccer, where, all of the big clubs from these various countries thought about getting together, forming a Super League. And most fans obviously were not on board with that necessarily. That could possibly be something like way into the future, like, several decades down the line. I could totally see that happening, especially, as we continue to get more and more globalized. Maybe if travel becomes not as much of an issue. Like right now, it would be logistically almost impossible to do that unless it's like, as you mentioned, like a very like brief kind of interleague period. Right now, in terms of interactions between an MPB team playing an MLB team, the issue is a lot of people have proposed, wouldn't it be cool if the winner of the Japan series plays the winner of the World Series? And, you know, because then it would be a true World Series, right? It wouldn't just be like the American series, it would be the World Series. The issue is like no MLB team would ever like give that much effort against an MPB team, because in their minds, winning the World Series is the ultimate prize, and you don't need to prove yourself against an MPB team. So that just wouldn't work. The only way that you could ever have that kind of competitive spirit is through tournaments like the World Baseball Classic, or as you mentioned, if they actually played in the same league. And that would be a true like global baseball league. It would probably, you know, require like buy-in from the biggest teams in Japan, like the Yomiuri Giants and the SoftBank Hawks. Definitely an interesting idea. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but probably still many decades away.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's happening anytime soon, but I think that the MLB looks at an organization like FIFA and sees, okay, they're arguably probably one of the largest global sports brands that exists. And hey, if we can throw together some kind of a super league or incorporate teams from around the world, maybe even just have different, you know, because they have different levels, like, you know, you said with soccer. I'm not a big soccer guy, but, you know, they have different leagues and levels of professional play, I guess, for lack of a better term. So, yeah, maybe that could be sort of applied to the professional aspect of it, where maybe it's not just like a minor league system up to pro. There's like maybe 2 or 3 levels in between that of varying degree of, you know, pay and success, I guess. But yeah, no, I definitely think that's something for sure. Maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, we might be able to see.
Yeah, certainly. It'd be difficult logistically in terms of like, you know, what if an American player just straight up doesn't want to play in Japan? So then the Japanese teams are going to be made up of, you know, almost purely Japanese talent, much as it is now, obviously, with a couple foreigners, you know, 5 or 6. You know, there's going to be a lot of like competitiveness issues that they have to sort out. So it would definitely be like, it's a pipe dream in many ways, but I wouldn't count it out as a possibility.
So I wanted to follow up and transition over to, I guess, the nitty gritty of baseball. Now we're going to get down to, I guess, statistics and players. So my next question to you is, when it comes to looking at players, what are some advanced statistics you look at that help you shape your perspective or analysis of a player, whether that is position specific, offense or defense specific, anything that you could share to enlighten us, I guess?
Yeah, I would say both with pitching and hitting, there are results-based and process-based ways you can look at a player. So like results-based is just straight up seeing, you know, how well the player is performing. And to do that, the best stat for a hitter would probably be like weighted on base average, WOBA, or WRC plus. These are like catch-all statistics that, you know, are combining all the important nitty-gritty numbers into one single statistic. So if you want to just look at one number, like I like WRC plus personally. That's a results-based way to look at hitting. Process-based would be more like chase rate. So how often is a player swinging outside the strike zone, and also zone contact rate. Zone contact rate is a popular way that people, you know, analyze prospects. Zone contact rate is kind of a very pure form of just bat to ball skills, because that is how often when a pitch is inside the strike zone are you hitting it, making contact with it, because it removes the factor of like, you know, is this guy disciplined? Does he have a good eye? You know, if you're swinging at bad pitches, obviously you can't make great contact. But if it is a pitch that is hittable, how often do you make contact? So if you see a guy that has like a zone contact percentage north of 90%, you know, that's a great contact talent. Likewise for chase rate, if you see a guy that has a chase rate below, you know, like 25%, that's like an elite, you know, a guy with elite patience, like a Juan Soto in MLB. On the pitching side, for results based, you might want to look at skill interactive ERA, so Sierra. In MPB, that's not widely available. So instead, I would look at expected fielding independent pitching, which is XFIP. That's the same as FIP, basically, except it neutralizes the home run to fly ball ratio to be same as the league average, basically. So FIP is typically reducing a pitcher's performance down to all the things they can control, which is, very simply strikeouts, walks, and home runs. Nothing that might be affected by the defense behind them with batted ball luck. And then XFIP, I think, is even better because while preventing home runs and keeping the ball in the park, that is a skill to an extent. There is a little bit of luck involved there, and it depends on the ballpark you play in as well. So I like looking at XFIP. And then process-based pitching stats, once again, chase rate. How often are you getting a guy to swing at pitches outside the strike zone? That probably means, you are fooling hitters a lot, especially with your off-speed pitches. In Japan, the most popular off-speed pitch being a splitter or a forkball. And then called strike plus whiff rate. I think that's a stat that was made by Nick Pollock of Pitchers List a while ago, but it is like widely used now. So just combining how many whiffs a pitcher gets with called strikes. If you get a lot of whiffs and you get a lot of called strikes as a pitcher, this sounds kind of obvious, but you're probably going to get good results.
And as far as you acquiring this information or understanding this information, is that something you did on your own time, or is that something you learned from some type of institution, like maybe part of your degree, or is that just something you just learned on your own?
It's something I learned on my own, and I think all baseball fans are capable of this. As long as you have the data in front of you and you are interested in it, I think it is. It can be daunting at first, like all these, different stats and numbers that you might not understand, but you just have to reduce everything down to like the fundamentals. Like I said with chase rate, it very much, some people might be like, oh, why do we care about something like that? If they're doing well, they're doing well. But like these are things that are predictive of future results, because if you do the right things over and over, it will lead to good results. So I think, again, it is a philosophical difference. Some people don't really care about how you get to the finish line as long as you get there. Other people, and I think I'm a bit more in this category, I like looking at how a guy gets to the finish line. And, they might be underperforming. Like they might be doing all the right things, but there's a little bit of bad luck involved. And maybe they didn't execute just one time. And that kind of has a domino effect on everything. Things where one small adjustment could lead to much better results. And so in terms of MPB data, I know it's difficult for a lot of English speaking fans to find access to any kind of advanced stats. The site that everyone should go to is called Delta Graphs, which, if MLB fans know Fangraphs, it's basically like a carbon copy of that. It gives you all like it doesn't give you like super, in-depth like StatCast data or anything, but it's going to give you all the stats I just named. So yeah, Delta Graphs, it is a subscription-based system, but definitely something that if you are a stat head and you like MPB, check it out.
Man, just hearing you talk, like wax intellectual on the statistics of baseball, man, it gets me fired up. So I wanted to follow up and ask, as far as now we're getting towards the players themselves. A few names that I have available for me is Roki Sasaki, Chusei Manami. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Munetaka Murakami. Chusei has been making the rounds on different publications and media for baseball. As far as his arm goes, it's been, it's gone viral and everything. Roki Sasaki is the generational pitching talent, and Munetaka Murakami is the youngest, if I'm not mistaken, the youngest player to hit 200 home runs at 24 years old and possibly coming to the MLB. So I wanted to ask what each of these players, what makes each of these players so special. And I don't know if Chusei Manami is coming to the MLB at all, but I wanted to ask, where do you believe the landing spots of each player will be when they eventually make their way to the MLB, if at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about like players is my favorite thing to do. So let's go through each one. Like with Chusei Manami, as you mentioned, he is making the rounds. I saw he got a thread on him on Twitter, got like over 100,000 likes. Like people love watching this guy throw because he plays right field. He has an absolute cannon. I always say he has the best arm for a Japanese outfielder since Ichiro Suzuki, and that is high praise. Manami's a guy that I've been in on pretty much since he was in high school. And that's not based on me being a scout and like analyzing his talent. Like, oh, I knew he was going to be good. It's the fact that he's half Congolese, so he's half African, half Japanese. And me being a half person, I always have a special place in my heart for half players, Hafu players. So Manami, ever since he was at Yokohama, I've liked him. And then in 2020, 2021, I saw he was doing excellent on the farm, the Nippon Ham Fighters farm. That's their minor league team. And I viewed him as like a top prospect in the league because his power is legit and his defense is so good. And we see him blossoming into a superstar today. Roki Sasaki, as you mentioned, I mean, he is a phenom, 22 years old, and he can average over 100 miles per hour on his fastball as a starter. Basically only Jacob deGrom, Hunter Green, Paul Skeens, Bobby Miller. Like, it's a very short list of players in the world who can match his velocity as a starter. And it's not only him throwing hard because, he has excellent command. And then he has two great breaking balls. Before, he was mostly a two-pitch guy, a fastball and a split finger. But now he has added a slider that he's using a lot more often. So the slider and the splitter together, that gives him three true out pitches. The fastball is usually the setup pitch. He uses that earlier in the count, and then he puts you away with the splitter or the slider. During the World Baseball Classic, he also worked on that pitch with Yu Darvish. And Yu Darvish obviously is kind of like the godfather of Japanese pitching at this point, has the respect of a lot of the younger generation. And Roki this year, he is currently hurt right now with some kind of right arm discomfort. He hasn't been able to put together a full healthy season yet. That's been his one flaw. But obviously it's really hard for anybody who, throws as hard as he does, with kind of a lanky build as well. He's tall, but he's not like a big built guy. So his whole thing for the rest of his career, whether that be in Japan or stateside, is going to be health. And then finally, Munetaka Murakami, my favorite player to watch in Japan currently, honestly, in terms of raw power that he has to all fields, it is among the best in the world. You see this guy, like, he can be beat on a fastball, like low and away in the zone. He just kind of flicks his wrist at it and he can take it out of the park the other way. And that's with the dead balls. This guy has hit the ball outside of Meiji Jingu Stadium with the dead balls. He has colossal power, incredibly disciplined approach as well. So his chase rate is always low. He walks a lot, kind of in that, Max Muncy, Matt Olson kind of build of he is going to swing and miss a lot. He definitely, the hit tool is there for sure because he won a Triple Crown in 2022 back when he set the Japanese-born home run record with 56 home runs. That surpassed the great Sadaharu O. So he does have a hit tool. He's won a batting title before, but in terms of consistency there with the contact, that's probably not going to be his strong suit for the rest of his career. But yeah, Roki Sasaki, Chusei Manami, Munetaka Murakami, all these guys at some point have expressed MLB aspirations. There's no timeline, especially with Roki. That's the hardest one to tell. Like, we know for a fact he wants to go to MLB. He has said this. And supposedly he said this the day he was drafted. That's what he told the Lotte Marines the day he was drafted, is that eventually he wants to go to MLB. He already had his sights set on that. We don't know when that's going to be. Is that going to be next year, or is that going to be maybe even as far as like 2027? And then Manami said he would like to play in MLB down the line. He said that last year. Murakami, he said that 2 years ago. So Murakami, the ETA for him is probably 2026. I would say, for somebody like Roki, the Dodgers or the Padres right now are still the top destinations, not least because, Friedman and Preller have already had contact with him. And with Manami, maybe he's somebody who could play for a team that's not as big. He could be more of a a Midwest market team even. I think a lot of different teams would have a shot at signing Manami if and when he chooses to go to MLB. Munetaka Murakami, I know that the Yankees have had their eyes on him for a while. A lot of Yankee fans already love him. I'm not sure that would be the best fit for him based on the fact that he can kind of get in his head a lot. And if the fans aren't behind him, the Yankee fans, the Phillies fans, East Coast fans, they can be kind of a tough crowd if you're in a slump. I think for Murakami, a different West Coast team, even like the Giants or the Mariners could be in there as well. But for now, they're still an MPB. So, it's all speculation at this point. Happy to watch them do their thing in Japan for as long as possible.
And do you believe that as far as, I hate to ask a leading question, but as far as Munetaka Murakami, do you believe that his ceiling could potentially just be doing DH, or is he more than that?
I think in Major League Baseball, he is likely to be a DH. He can play first base for sure. He's been a third baseman for most of his career in Japan now, although he was drafted as a catcher, so he is an athletic guy. But basically, ever since he bulked up, he has been a below average defender at third base, just doesn't quite have the range. He'll make the routine plays, but he's not going to make many spectacular plays. That's kind of the drawback of being such a strong guy, is that he's not really fit to play third base anymore. So we're looking at a first baseman DH down the line in MLB.
And just to follow up on Chusei and Roki, Chusei, I don't know why, but he kind of gives me like Yasiel Puig vibes for like the strength of his arm. Because I mean, if you remember back in the days, Yasiel Puig had like a live arm that he could just throw guys out from right field to third base. And Roki Sasaki, man, so I just wanted to make a quick observation or comment, because I don't know if I've ever seen this before, but when he throws his fastball, at least from some of the videos that I've seen, and maybe it's just because of the baseball itself, but when I see him release the ball, there is like a puff or a cloud of baby rosin that's coming out of his hand, or whatever substance is being used, and I'm like, this is the craziest thing that I've ever seen. This guy that is a giant and a worldly talent for pitching is like releasing the ball, and there's like, it's like cartoon cartoon physics, or am I seeing something crazy? Am I crazy, or are you seeing this as well? And like, what does it mean?
No, I think your eyes are not deceiving you. I think a lot of Japanese pitchers, I feel like they use more rosin than a lot of American pitchers. I mean, that might just be a perception I have, but one of his teammates on Samurai Japan, Hiromi Ito, who plays for the Fighters, he is known for putting a lot of rosin on his hand, and when he throws the ball, you see an even bigger puff. So it's kind of gamesmanship. You're tricking the batter by adding like an extra effect there. It is kind of cartoonish, but it makes you, for Roki, it looks really cool. It's like he's an actual flamethrower. And then, with Manami, he's a guy you likened him to a guy like Puig. I would also say, a fellow Cuban like Yoenis Cespedes, in terms of like just the raw strength of his arm is ridiculous. He can throw a laser beam dart to home plate from way deep in the outfield. And he's a very, very exciting player to watch on both sides of the ball. So I'm glad you brought up these three players in particular, because if you want to get into MPB right now and you have no other place to start, I would recommend with these three players. Just like watch these guys play, and you will probably fall in love with the league.
Undoubtedly, man. I mean, I go on YouTube to see replays of Chusei and Roki and Murataka Murakami. I'm just like, I'm becoming a real fan of Nippon professional baseball. So to follow up on that, I wanted to ask about the World Baseball Classic and Samurai Japan baseball. I know we're a bit of ways away, but what speculations do you have about the WBC and Samurai Japan baseball maybe potential prospects for the roster itself, or anything like that?
Yeah, so before the World Baseball Classic in 2026, we do have the Premier 12 this November. The Premier 12 is for the top 12 baseball countries in the world, according to the WBSC rankings. It cannot include, major league players, but it can include some top prospects in major league systems. Still yet to be seen if it, 40-man roster status, if those guys can play. But a lot of superstars now in MLB, like Julio Rodriguez of the Mariners, did play in the previous Premier 12. Seiya Suzuki, Shota Imanaga, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So it is a huge tournament, and Japan is going to be expected to win. Not winning gold would be a colossal failure for them. In 2015, the first iteration of the tournament, they placed third. So that was a failure. They lost to Korea. The last time they did get their revenge on Korea, their main rival. And then in 2026, which, because the WBC, the 2021 edition, I guess, was, pushed back because of COVID, became 2023. There's only 3 years now between 2023 and 2026. Not too much turnover there in terms of the roster looking ahead to this upcoming WBC. And they have a very good chance to repeat, much like they did in 06 and in 09. They could definitely win the World Baseball Classic again. In 06 and 09, it was Daisuke Matsuzaka, who played for the Seibu Lions and then later the Boston Red Sox. He won MVP both times. It would be cool to see Shohei Ohtani win MVP in back-to-back tournaments as well. Roki Sasaki, Munetaka Murakami, those guys will definitely be there, barring health. And then Chusei Manami definitely has the talent to be there. Japan's outfield is absolutely loaded with guys like Seiya Suzuki, Masataka Yoshida, Lars Nootbaar, Kensuke Kondo, talent that play in Major League Baseball already. So we'll see if there's a spot on the roster for him, but I definitely think he can make it. And kind of the important overarching theme of Samurai Japan, the national team, is that even though there are more and more top stars going to MLB than ever before, the foundation of Samurai Japan is still based on MPB talent. And that's huge because you saw that in the finals last year against Team USA. The way Japan won that was not by throwing out, Yu Darvish for the entire game, or, Shohei Ohtani closed it, but he was only throwing that one inning. Everyone else that came before Ohtani and Darvish were MPB players at the time. You had Shota Imanaga, you had Shosei Togo, Hiroto Takahashi, Hiromi Ito, Taisei. These are players in MPB. These are the top arms in MPB, and they proved that they can shut down even the best American hitters. Maybe those guys will end up in MLB like way down the line. But I think it really speaks to how good the talent pool is in MPB, and you have, way harder throwers than ever before. So for a lot of like casual people who thought, MPB is just kind of a feeder league. It's not very good. The talent is like, it's AAA level. I think it really kind of proved people wrong. So even though a short tournament like the World Baseball Classic can't really tell you too much about like where every country's standing is in the world, I think it definitely can have a lot of cultural impact in that way by showing people that, like Japan has a lot of legit players, even guys you've never heard of.
Yeah, I just have to say that I'm very disappointed as far as when it comes to U.S. players that they're not willing to take on, national pride, or they prioritize money and their career. I guess I would understand that, they want to get paid and all that stuff, and maybe playing for a national team is problematic to that because, the health of baseball players that can unravel, and, they'll be on the outs as far as making money goes. But man, I just really wish that there would be more players that can fill out the team that are the best of the best as far as the U.S. goes, and just taking like national pride so that we really could get the best of the best for both, for the future of baseball, to have Japan going at it with Korean baseball and U.S. baseball, that we get the best incarnations of all teams. But I mean, I can't control that. But I would certainly love to have, it would be great to have Paul Skeens be on the national team so we can get those, what if scenarios? What if he was in a World Baseball Classic scenario to pitch against, Munetaka Murakami? I think everybody would love to talk about that type of situation.
Yes, absolutely. The thing that's missing still for Team USA is the pitching, because on the hitting side, you had, Mike Trout participating was huge. It was still missing the likes of Aaron Judge and Bryce Harper due to injury. But like a lot of the talent there was there. But it still was missing too many key names to really be like, this is the best team that USA can put out there. Now, a lot of other countries like Venezuela, Puerto Rico, they definitely care about the tournament. A lot of the Latin players would say that the WBC is more important to them than the World Series. And that's the same thing that, Japanese players will tell you, Korean players will tell you. Once you get that full buy-in from the US players, and I think it will eventually come as this tournament becomes more and more legitimized, people are going to get like crazy FOMO. They're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe I missed out on like this amazing tournament. That's when you're going to begin to see a lot more players signing up. Like, yeah, I do want to play October style baseball in March. And the World Baseball Classic, yeah, it's just like, it's an amazing way to watch the blend of different baseball cultures, of different philosophies, of players that would never, ever get a chance to play against each other otherwise. You get to see a sneak peek of, like future talent that, isn't in MLB yet. So there's a reason to watch for everybody. And yeah, I just think that the WBC is like, that's where we should all hedge our bets. Like that is the future of globalized baseball.
Right. I guess I have two final questions that I want to ask. And I just want to know, in terms of in grand scheme, like, how do you feel about the state of baseball itself, and what do you believe the future holds?
I think baseball globally is in a really good place. In the US, you might have heard in like past years, like, oh, baseball's dying. It's a boomer's game. Like, that's absolutely not the case. I mean, the core of baseball is always going to be the same. The style, the strategies are going to evolve based on, just how much of a database sport that it is. And I think we are going to see some big changes over time. Like the velocity revolution that we've seen with guys throwing harder than ever, like the average major league fastball now being close to 95 miles per hour. That is crazy. It's just like unthinkable before. Maybe that entails having to push the mound back. Maybe that, we've already had like the shift band and things like that. So there might have to be tweaks, the pitch clock and whatnot. We'll see if Japan chooses to adapt that, because they haven't yet. In terms of Japanese baseball, I do think some like adaptation and evolution is necessary. Like, as much as it is cool to see them still playing small ball, the lack of like sabermetrics, the lack of acceptance of analytics here, and sort of the Showa era, that's like the era before this current generation, their influence on the game can hold a lot of players back, I think, by having too much of an old school approach. And that doesn't mean you have to completely get rid of the tradition. You keep the good aspects of it, but you change the aspects that can be built upon. And I think that Japan winning the WBC last year with a roster that was made up of, players that profile more like MLB guys. Like, you had a lot of power pitchers, for instance, on the roster, instead of like previous iterations of the team where they would choose like, oh, this guy, he's a finesse specialist. This guy, he's a control pitcher. This guy's a submariner. We can outsmart our way to beating the best of the world. And in 2013 and 2017, they couldn't do that. They fell short in the semifinals. And this previous tournament in 2023, Hideki Kuriyama, the manager, said, you know what, I don't care about like seniority, even though in Japan it is like, oh, the veterans, should be able to earn respect over like the younger players. He said, I'm just going to select the best roster that Japan has. So a key example of that was him selecting Yuki Udagawa, who is a half Japanese, half Filipino player who had just made his MPB debut in August of the previous year. So he only had like 20 innings of MPB top level experience, and he made the national team because he had the stuff to be on the team. He deserved that spot. That would have never happened under previous iterations of the team, I think. So you are beginning to see evolution in that sense. And so, yeah, I think baseball is in a good place right now. I'm excited for the future. Seeing tournaments like the Premier 12 and World Baseball Classic getting even bigger and bigger, getting more recognized, like having more, of a audience, that is going to legitimize it even more. And if there's money in it, then you're going to have the best players playing in it.
Yeah, that's a great answer and very informative. I mean, man, it's been a real treat to just sit here with you and talk for an hour or nearly 2 hours now. So my final question to you, for us that live here in the US and have dreams or even aspirations of going to Japan and really getting the nitty gritty of Japan, I wanted to ask, or rather transition over to, food and travel. But I wanted to ask, for someone like yourself who has lived in Japan for some time, you've been able to do as the locals do, what are some food and places, and whether that is specific to Hokkaido or not, what are some foods and places you enjoy that a visitor wouldn't know about otherwise?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question because Japan has a lot to offer depending on the city you're in terms of just like things that a lot of travelers might not know about, because I do think a lot of like tourists these days are very well researched. There's kind of a running joke in like Japanese television that tourists know more about Japan than even Japanese people, because they look up some really obscure places and they just like become like tourist hubs. But beyond just Japanese food, like Japan has, especially Tokyo, has a great selection of like South and Southeast Asian food. So, if you want like legit food from different regions of Asia, like Tokyo has it all. And whether that be like Thai food, Indian food, Nepalese food, they have it all. One place I would like to recommend, just because it's near a baseball stadium, by Tokyo Dome, home of the Yomiuri Giants, by Suidobashi Station, they have a place called Kagureya. Kagureya is a chicken ramen place. So for people who don't eat red meat, or even if you do eat red meat, but you just want to try chicken ramen, which is not really that common, that place is fantastic. In Hokkaido, which I have only visited once, the seafood is great there. They have their own special kind of ramen. They have a burger chain called Lucky Piero that's famous. And then you got to check out Escon Field, state-of-the-art, beautiful new stadium there in Kita, Hiroshima, which is not too far from Sapporo. One city that I would recommend for people that I don't think is as well known among like overseas people is Atami. Atami is like a seaside city in Shizuoka. It's only like an hour or two from Tokyo by bullet train. That's a beautiful city, and then they have a lot there. You could take a boat to a nearby tiny island. You can visit the Trick Art Museum. They have the Atami Castle there, looking over the ocean. Atami is a really good city, and Yokohama Chinatown is right next to Yokohama Stadium. So if you want to catch a Bay Stars game and then go to Chinatown, a lot of great Chinese food there. But yeah, like Japan has a lot to offer. And I think everyone should visit if you can. If you do, make sure you check out a baseball game. That's all. That's like obviously as someone who talks about Japanese baseball all the time, I have to say, like, you have to check out a baseball game if you come to Japan. But I think even if you don't, you're going to have a great time.
What baseball stadium do you enjoy the most?
I do think Escon Field, Hokkaido is just beautiful. I mean, I got a chance to visit that for the first time last month. And I mean, it's the same kind of architecture blueprint as the Texas Rangers new stadium. It's beautiful, totally state of the art, and it has a huge jumbotron. Tokyo Dome gets a lot of shit from people because it's like, oh, it's old. It's called the Egg. It's just like a dome. I actually like Tokyo Dome. Like, it's air conditioned at least, which is good. Meiji Jingu Stadium's getting torn down, unfortunately. That's kind of the Wrigley Field kind of vibes that you get from, it's a classic old stadium. Unfortunately, it's getting torn down. If you go down to Kobe near Osaka, you can go to Koshien Stadium, which is, again, that's like the Wrigley or Fenway of Japan, just a classic stadium. Babe Ruth played there at one point. And I haven't been there yet, but Hiroshima Stadium is really nice as well. It's an outdoor stadium. A lot of domes in Japan just because it rains a lot. I think people like outdoor stadiums a little more than domes. But I would say Escon Field Hokkaido is number one.
As far as the stadiums go, do they have like interesting things that are not here in the US, like vending machines or anything interesting that's just separates it from, I guess, US stadiums?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the food is definitely different. Like I'm trying to think because I'm so used to it now. Like what is different about US stadiums, like yakisoba, like, you know, like noodles you're going to see in a lot of Japanese stadiums. You're not going to see that in the US. You have vendor, like girls and boys that walk through the aisles carrying like, you know, different beer or, you know, soft drinks on their backs, and you can just kind of flag them down. That's different than what you see in like a lot of American stadiums where you might just see like a guy with hot dogs or something, right? So you'll notice like little different quirks here and there, but you know what, in general, it's a baseball stadium at the end of the day. And I do like that. Like, even if there's small differences, we're all going to be united in the fact that it's baseball.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you again. I don't have any additional questions, and I just wanted to thank you again for taking time out of your day to come and talk to us and talk baseball and talk about your personal story. It's been a real privilege, and you know, we can't wait to share this specific episode with everybody. For anybody that loves Nippon professional baseball, MLB, or just baseball in general, or want to learn about journalists that are writing about baseball, I mean, it's been a real treat.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. I love the work you guys are doing, touching all your bases in all these different topics. I'm going to keep doing coverage of Japanese baseball in English. So I recommend anyone who's interested, because I know there's a market for it. It's just that the language barrier can be tough. It's hard to get information, but it's out there, and it's not just me. If you want to look at like the work Jim Allen does, or my friend Gaijin Baseball, there's a lot of good people in this community who will help you get into Japanese baseball if you so choose to. So yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been our privilege and our honor to have you on. And don't hang up, don't disconnect, because we're gonna play our little outro music here in a minute. And then we just want to talk to you for just a couple minutes after we're done here. So just don't, disconnect or whatever.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna go to the bathroom really quick, okay?
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, perfect. So
right,
anyways,
we'll go ahead.
Yeah. So anyways, if you want to check our stuff out, our other podcasts, you can go to GameRageMagazine.com. You can hear our full menu of podcasts and content that we produce. You can go to Game Rage Magazine on Instagram and TikTok, at Game Rage Mag on Twitter /X. Follow Yuri, the
Yakyu Cosmopolitan on YouTube, Yakyu Cosmopolitan on Instagram. I believe he's Yakyu Cosmopolitan on Twitter as well. But when the episode comes out, I'll be sure to include all that information if you want to follow him specifically on any particular platforms. So just be on the lookout for that. And I don't know if I have anything else to add. Do you have?
That's pretty much it. Thank you guys for listening. Stay tuned for future interviews that we have. We're going to have one of the CIF Division I champion Corona Panthers baseball players on, a young prospect, here in the next week or two. So look out for that. Plus the many more interviews we have lined up. So anyways, thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
That was Without Censor, the Game Rage Magazine interview podcast. Visit www.GameRageMagazine.com for the full menu of podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Game Rage Magazine. Also on X at Game Rage Mag for all the latest episodes and content. Thanks again for listening. Except if you're with the FCC, then go on, get out of here. Go on, get.